Denberg? Denberg?
Jonathan?
I wish to speak with you.
It appears as though you already are.
Why, yes. I meant regarding our rather contemptuous exchange the other day.
Contemptuous? That's a little melodramatic, sir.
Regardless, I feel the need to clear the air.
Clear away.
I apologize if I have not been fully taking your feelings into account. That is not always my strong suit. You do a lot of work here.
The cookies have returned!
As I was saying...
Mr. McNalley, sir, thank you. I feared your wrath that befell my snacks was to last forever.
Archie, I was merely making a small point. After some thought, I do rather like our new cold opens, but we...
Thank you, Mr. McNalley.
I can tell, actually. Now, Denberg, I was...
Isn't it time for you to record the show, Mr. McNalley?
Ah, so it is. I'm sorry, Denberg, I must...
Of course, Jonathan.
There's just so much news. We can continue this talk later?
You know there's more to life than news.
You are not the first person to say that to me. But, for now... Hello. Welcome, listeners. This is Yesterday's News Today, and I am Jonathan T. McNalley. There is so very much to cover this week, I fear we may not linger on any one story for very long. We begin with the confirmation hearings of Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett. Republicans have pushed for her confirmation with less than 3 weeks before Election Day, and fewer than 4 weeks until the court hears a case that could challenge the Affordable Care Act. The Grand Old Party focused on the credentials of the nominee, wherein they deem her to be quite qualified for the position. A much-discussed moment was when she revealed she wasn't using any notes to answer questions throughout the proceedings. Democrats were, of course, more critical, but their interrogation was nothing compared to what has been seen in other recent confirmation hearings. Barrett largely avoided giving any definitive answers as, quote, "It signals to litigants that she may tilt one way or another in a pending case," end quote. Little was revealed about how she would side on cases involving abortion, the ACA, or the possibility of a contested election. It was a handful of days of unanswered questions about ever-elusive expectations. Prior to the hearings, politicians on the left appeared confident that they might delay Barrett's confirmation until after such issues had passed. But by Wednesday's end, they had seemingly conceded to the inevitability that she would join the Supreme Court. As both sides have battled over this politicized position, perhaps one moment was more revealing than all the rest. When asked to name the 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment, the constitutional originalist Amy Coney Barrett said, speech, religion, press, assembly, but fumbled on the final one. The forgotten freedom is indeed justice. If Barrett's confirmation is as inevitable as it appears, I do hope this misremembered right is forefront on her mind as she rules on future cases. That took a bit longer than intended, so we must move ahead at a bit of a quicker pace. More news comes from the Supreme Court as they face big decisions regarding the U.S. Census. On Tuesday, they ruled that the U.S. Census Bureau could conclude its 2020 count early, on October 15th, as opposed to allowing it to continue through the end of the month to account for delays from the coronavirus pandemic. Critics have said this shortened window may not allow for an accurate count and data processing. This decision favored by the Trump administration is politically advantageous, as the constitutionally mandated count determines how approximately $1.5 trillion in federal spending is directed, and how House seats are apportioned among the 50 states. The original schedule would have meant that the winner of November's presidential election would have presided over this process by April 30th of 2021. This shortened schedule means this can all take place by the end of the year. Also, on Friday, the Supreme Court announced that it will review President Trump's attempt to exclude undocumented immigrants when calculating how congressional seats are apportioned. The result would likely shift political power from urban states with large immigrant populations toward ones that are rural with more Republican interests. As the Trump administration seeks to change future elections, the 2020 election season is well underway. As of Thursday, more than 17 million ballots have already been cast, which could indicate a historically high voter turnout. According to some projections, the highest it's been in over a century. This is largely due to changes in state laws allowing mail-in votes in the wake of the pandemic. Based on early voting data, Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1, but more Republicans are expected to vote in person on Election Day. While both candidates did not debate this week, they did have competing town halls on Thursday night. This format was decided by the Commission on Presidential Debates after President Trump contracted coronavirus and refused to participate in a virtual debate with candidate Joe Biden. Overall, most that was discussed that night was repetition of what has been said time and time again by both sides, and the usual questions were dodged. Ultimately, it is unlikely much was said or done at either town hall that will greatly sway voters. Nielsen Media Research does indicate that the former vice president's debate did have more viewers, with 14.1 million, versus the president's 13.5 million. While Joe Biden's team considered this a win, this is more likely due to the networks that the town halls aired on. Friday marked 1 year to the day since House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and President Donald J. Trump last spoke. This lack of communication and absence of a professional relationship is, of course, not the only reason stimulus negotiations are sluggish, but it is indicative of Washington's bipartisan rift that continues to stall talks. Democrats, Republicans, and the president are all at odds on this stimulus issue. Mr. Trump has said that he's willing to, quote, go big, an advantageous sentiment with a voting populace that is once again seeing new waves of layoffs and unemployment. Meanwhile, Republicans want to curb spending, and Democrats want specific provisions included. All are at an impasse. A key moment of progress did occur this week when Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi did finally come to an agreement on national strategies for COVID testing and tracing. This may be more important now than ever as the United States faces a new wave of coronavirus cases. America is now averaging 54,000 new confirmed cases every day, the highest numbers since early August. Dr. Anthony Fauci warns that coronavirus infection rates are too high heading into the end of the year, as the cooler months can make the spread of COVID-19 even more likely, especially as people are shut indoors, less able to social distance. There is yet further concern as there have been reports of individuals reinfected with coronavirus. While such cases are rare, they do show that when recovered, individuals are not completely immune. And also the window for reinfections has been as short as a few weeks. Additionally, there is evidence that second infections may come with even more severe symptoms. Europe also faces significantly increased COVID infection rates. Many countries had relaxed their lockdowns over the summer, but now must struggle with decisions to halt this new wave. France has imposed nighttime curfews this week in Paris and 9 other cities. A recent report by the New York Times shows that early in the pandemic, senior members of the president's economic team were privately informing investors that the effects of the impending pandemic might be worse than what the president was informing the public. As early as February, private meetings were held with largely conservative investors, donors to the GOP, that depicted COVID-19's potentially dire impact on the U.S. and world economies. This was as Mr. Trump was informing the U.S. people that the outbreak was very much under control. At the time, this assessment spread through the investment world, with investors on Wall Street betting on the idea that stock prices for companies would soon fall. Traders who had access to this information used it to gain a financial advantage during a chaotic 3 days when global markets were teetering. Moving on to world news. The suburban town of Conflans-Saint-Honorine in France was the site of a gruesome killing on Friday that left a school teacher beheaded. The suspect was shot dead by police later the same day. This followed after the teacher had received threats for a lesson he had given on the 2015 Charlie Hebdo attacks, which was a string of terror attacks starting in the offices of the satirical magazine that published caricatures of Mohammed. The teacher had used these images as a part of a discussion. French President Emmanuel Macron has called this an Islamic attack, saying the teacher was killed because he was teaching students freedom of speech, the freedom to believe and not believe. Officials in France say they have detained 9 people in connection with the murder. Next, former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd has called for a major government inquiry into an alleged monopoly by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. The company controls about 70% of the nation's print media. The Prime Minister's petition has already received more than 100,000 signatures. The petition calls for improving market diversity of Australia's media sector, which is heavily split by only 3 companies and 2 public broadcasters. It goes on to criticize News Corp for routinely attacking Mr. Murdoch's opponents in politics and business. The publisher has also been involved in recent controversies for allegedly minimizing the role of climate change during last summer's brush fires, and for racism in a cartoon depiction of Serena Williams. News Corp Australia and Mr. Murdoch have not commented on the petition. Very interesting. I wonder what Miss Murdoch would have to say about all of that. Denberg, I am attempting banter. That story might interest Scarlett, don't you think?
Sure, sir. Though I believe she said she was of no relation.
Ah, yes, of course. Nonetheless, I feel she may indeed find the idea of a media empire monopolizing the news of a nation to be quite enticing.
Well, you cannot very well continue making the news without any income.
What an excellent transition to a word from our sponsors.
Whatever you say, Jonathan.
Do you not have anything prepared for us?
Oh, no, I have something for you.
Oh, do carry on, then.
Do you find yourself ever overlooked by those you consider to be your friends or colleagues? Demeaned despite your best efforts when you put all of yourself into your work each and every day? Have you become the punchline of all the jokes in your place of employment? Well, perhaps it's time that you made a change. If we were capable of having a sponsor, I would maybe advertise a company that could find you a new job. But alas, we are not nearly that successful. So maybe instead you must look within. Be the change. But that doesn't mean you have to change yourself. There is no need to adapt or improve. No, you can instead change the environment that has become hostile toward you. Make those around you bend to your will. You can become a force to be reckoned with. In other words, if you cannot be respected, perhaps you can be feared.
That is very foreboding, Denberg, and honestly a fairly terrible message to give to our listeners.
I thought it was empowering, Jonathan.
Denberg, I know we have made jokes at your expense, but that is as friends do. We are your friends.
Of course you are, boss.
Denberg, please try to tell me what specifically is bothering you.
Nothing. I am fine.
I'm not so sure of that. You can talk to me, Denberg.
Jonathan, it is just that I have...
Hello, Mr. McNalley? Is it time for the local news?
Archie, yes, but I'm trying...
Oh, boy, I had so many stories for you, sir. So many, but I was able to narrow it down to these. Here you are.
Oh, thank you, Archie.
I actually had some prepared this week.
Oh, Denberg, I'm sorry. We can
No,
do...
it's It's fine. He's clearly excited about this.
I really am.
Next week, Denberg.
We shall see about that.
I'm not sure what that means, but for now, some strangely true local news. We begin with some odoriferous fauna in Dunedin, New Zealand. Just 9 months after a bloom in Christchurch, a corpse plant in the Dunedin Botanic Gardens may be set to flower. Next week, the garden staff will weigh the plant's bulb-like stem, called a corm, to confirm if another rare bloom can be expected. In 2018, the plant bloomed for the first time in a decade, gaining massive worldwide media attention and thousands of visitors. They got to see one of the world's largest flowers that just so happens to produce a nauseating smell comparable with rotting flesh. The flower lasts for only 24 to 36 hours. Meanwhile, Colin Purrington's forgotten treats may lead to new scientific discoveries. It was 2012 when he purchased a box of Twinkies for fears of Hostess brand's bankruptcy. Carry on to last week, and a peckish Purrington remembered his long-lost snack cakes. After biting into one, he nearly vomited, saying it tasted like an old sock. Not that he's ever eaten an old sock. Upon examining the other Twinkies, he was surprised to find one with a dark blemish the size of a quarter, and the other shriveled like a dry morel mushroom. He posted his discovery on the World Wide Web, gaining attention as many think these treats to be immortal, though their official shelf life is only 45 days. This posting gained the attention of scientists Brian Lovett and Matt Kaysen, who study fungi at West Virginia University, and then obtained the putrid pastries. They have had trouble gaining living spores from the shriveled Twinkie, but they are not giving up. The duo previously researched the Easter treat Peeps, as molds find them difficult to grow on. They determined that the small marshmallow birds are essentially an extreme environment. They are fascinated by all things fungi, saying that they are everywhere and have an amazing set of tools that let them break down all kinds of substances, even, quote, growing on jet fuel, end quote.
Speaking of jet fuel, can I maybe do that conspiracy corner I've been attempting for a few weeks?
Oh, I don't know. The show is going a bit longer than I'd like.
I'd really appreciate it, Mr. McNalley, and it's a big and very important story. It needs to be told, sir.
Oh, all right, Archie. Let's see what you've got.
Thank you, Mr. McNalley, truly. For weeks, this story has been eating away at my consciousness. Somewhat because it so validated my past paranoias. In all honesty, I have not seen much coverage about the FinCEN Files by major media outlets. There may be some rather obvious reasons. Excuse me. Stick to the facts, Archie. A side note before we continue. An incredible thank you to our researcher, Amy, for her help in sorting through these dizzyingly dastardly deeds. To those who might be listening, this was really all her. No need to come for me.
Archie?
Right. So sorry. Just the facts. Just the facts. FinCEN stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They are the agency within the Treasury Department charged with combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. They collect millions of these suspicious activity reports, known as SARs, and make them available to U.S. law enforcement agencies and financial intelligence operations in other nations. Examples of such operations include bank transfers of suspicious money, less than kosher profits of international banks, and major funds toward criminal activity. There has been much speculation about such transactions, but this has been so often dismissed as conspiratorial or even fake news. The reason we are speaking on this today is due to a story broken by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and, of all places, BuzzFeed News. These news entities combed through over 2,100 suspicious activity reports which was submitted to FinCEN to unveil a convoluted web of money laundering, suspicious shell companies, and even moving money for internationally regarded criminals. One of the quote-unquote smaller transactions involved major U.S. banks processing millions of dollars in transactions for the family of Viktor Krapunov, the former mayor of the East Kazakhstan region, even after Interpol issued the American equivalent of an arrest warrant for, quote, the creation and guidance of an organized criminal group or criminal association, and participation in a criminal association, expropriation or embezzlement of trusted property, fraud, legalization of monetary funds or other property obtained illegally, abuse of official powers, receipt of a bribe. This is one of the lesser examples of such dubious transactions unveiled by the FinCEN Files. There is not enough time to go through all the intricacies of the report right now. The web of people and organizations involved with such corruption. I have indeed been mapping it out in my small corner of the office, but unfortunately, we do not have several hours together on this show for me to tell of the ties to Jeffrey Epstein, or suspicious payments to luxury sushi brand Nobu by a potential Putin asset, who also rubs elbows with President Trump, or how Russian money is tied to funding such organizations as the Mexican cartel and Al-Qaeda, or how North Korea, with the help of China, laundered over $100 million through major U.S. banks, in what was quite possibly an attempt to infiltrate the United States financial system, or how countless companies we consume on a daily basis may be tied to the very evils we blissfully ignore.
Archie, are you sure this is all entirely true? Some of this sounds a bit far-fetched.
Every word. And that is what should concern all of us, Mr. McNalley. I am sorry, sir. I am just so worried. And there is simply too much to go into. I encourage our listeners to look into the reports by ICIJ and BuzzFeed themselves. But for now, I will give my takeaway from all this dire data. Spoken simply, the banks that we use may not be trustworthy enough to help combat such crimes. Linda A. Lacewell, the superintendent of the New York State Department of Financial Services, acknowledged herself that the financial system is awash with trillions of dollars in dirty money. The financial regulator has called on banks to help fix the problem, which is akin to asking the fox to protect the proverbial henhouse. While banks in the U.S. are required to file suspicious activity reports whenever they spot transactions that may be linked to criminal activity, this has proven to be a major conflict of interest for such institutions. What the FinCEN Files have brought to light is that many of these reports are filed after big banks have long since okayed such transfers, meaning the dirty money was already long gone. We are not talking days or weeks. They would be reported on months or even years after such occurrences, leaving law enforcement with less leads and evidence to combat human trafficking, child exploitation, fraud, corruption, terrorism, and cyber-enabled crime. And that's if agencies do not already have their pockets lined by the profits from these very crimes. Mr. McNalley, listeners, I do apologize. This show, these people, all of you have inspired me. Inspired me to reject the seedy world of conspiracies and delve deeper into just the facts, as you always say, sir. But I have long been surrounded by such surreal stories, patchwork tales telling of connections between powerful people, webs of lies, and double-dealing. I have had dear friends speak of apocalyptic visions brought about by international banks feeding money into illicit international interests to bring about some sort of new one-world order. It took a good deal of effort to not allow my thoughts to return to such fears. Reading through these reports, seeing how a push for ever greater profits can warp the moralities of the very institutions that regulate our world, our lives. However, it has been excruciatingly difficult to separate the Archibald of old from, well, the man I hope I'm becoming.
Archie, there are indeed times when fact can be stranger than fiction. I do appreciate this report. When there is truth behind such widespread deceit, the unbelievable reality must be brought to light.
That's exactly what I hope to do. I want to spread authentic truths to make up for the lies and conspiracies I once recklessly shared.
You are doing good work, Archie, and I am quite glad that you are part of our team. I truly appreciate what you have been doing here.
Thank you, Mr. McNalley.
Thank you. Why don't you say the ending this week?
Oh! Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for listening to another episode of Yesterday's News Today. And until we meet again, it is what it is. Good night!
This program was written and performed by Roger J. Thatcher and Dennis Schenberg, with Caitlin Wolfe as Scarlett Murdoch, and additional research by Amy Lee Nieves. You are encouraged to obtain a subscription to this broadcast with the simple selection of a button below. Furthermore, you can indicate your appreciation by giving us the old thumbs up. Did you have any thoughts about any of our stories? Please comment them below. Or to read those of our newsmen, tune your Twitter to @RadioYNT. And as always, be sure to tune in next week to hear tomorrow's news of yesterday. Then.
Hello? Who is this?
Hello, ma'am. Pardon, Scarlett, this is Denberg.
You know you don't have to do the voice around me.
Oh, right. Sorry, sometimes I forget I'm even doing the voice.
That's unsettling. Why are you calling?
I've been thinking a lot about how things have been going around here.
And?
And I think it's time for a change, Scarlett.
All right. I will be seeing you very soon.